From early childhood, many of us have been raised with the belief that the key to happiness and self-fulfillment lies in the external world. We have been taught that one of the most important goals in life is to find love, start a family, and find that other half that completes us, as if we are inherently incomplete. And so we embark on a relentless, sometimes desperate search that often becomes a reflection of inner emptiness. But what if things are different? What if the real love we crave is not outside but inside ourselves? What if, instead of chasing the perfect partner, we should learn to be in harmony with ourselves? An author, whose works have become a compass for many on the path of personal growth, has left us a valuable legacy of wise thoughts, pointing to one simple but profound truth. The most important relationship in life is the relationship with oneself. And this is not just a beautiful phrase for a motivational post, but a fundamental principle that, if understood and accepted, can radically change our perception of the world. However, before delving into this topic, it is important to clarify. This is not about justifying loneliness or avoiding romantic relationships. No, it is rather a radical proposal. Stop looking for a partner to solve all your problems. Stop chasing someone who will make you feel valuable and complete. Start learning to be alone with yourself, without fuss, without distractions, without trying to run away from yourself. After all, often people are not so much looking for love as confirmation of their own importance. They are looking for someone to dispel their doubts, fill the inner void, and shelter them from fears. But they do not realize that no one can do this for them on a permanent basis. Perhaps this will work for a while, like an emotional bandage, but in the end, all unresolved internal conflicts will sooner or later reappear, casting a shadow on any relationship. The famous Louise argued that our innermost thoughts and beliefs, like invisible threads, weave the pattern of our lives. If there is no room for self-love in the soul, if there is no sense of self-worth and respect, then it is not surprising that in relationships with other people, we encounter the same thing. Is it possible to build a strong and healthy union without knowing how to get along with yourself? Often we mistakenly believe that love is a complete merger with another person. However, often what we take for love turns out to be just an agreement between two imperfections. Two people who have not known themselves desperately try to fill the void with each other, instead of learning to feel comfortable in their own skin. There are people who are panicky afraid of loneliness, even short-term. They fill their day to the limit with things to do, surround themselves with noise and bustle, look for meaningless meetings, not because it brings them joy, but because they are afraid of silence. They are afraid of what they might discover if they are left alone with their thoughts. But how can you get to know another person if you do not even know yourself? Learning to be alone with yourself is a bold and difficult path. This does not mean that you need to come to terms with loneliness or turn into a hermit who avoids communication. It is about creating an inner refuge where you can find peace and tranquility without needing constant approval from others. It is the ability to look at yourself with compassion, heal emotional wounds without shifting them to others, gain strength without depending on other people's opinions, and feel like a complete person. This process can be painful, as it involves the destruction of deeply ingrained beliefs. From childhood, we have been convinced that self-love is selfishness, that putting our interests first is indecent, and that loneliness is a sign of failure. But how many relationships arise out of fear, not out of a sincere desire to be together? Of course, this does not mean that you should give up the opportunity to share your life with another person if you feel like it. You shouldn't assume that only having a partner makes you worthy of love and respect. Otherwise, the union risks turning into a kind of prison, where one of the partners becomes dependent on the other, losing their own individuality and adapting to other people's expectations. The famous Louise Hay emphasized that the foundation of healthy relationships is how we treat ourselves. Do you notice how you treat yourself in everyday life? Do you show compassion to yourself when you make mistakes? Or do you subject yourself to severe punishment? Do you allow yourself to relax, enjoy life, make mistakes? Or do you demand perfection from yourself in order to feel worthy of love? The relationship with yourself forms the basis for all your external connections. If there is self-rejection, guilt, or an acute need for someone inside you, then this is what you will project onto others. At this moment, many people are asking themselves, does this mean I don't have the right to want to be with someone? Of course you can want that. However, let that desire come from a sense of inner harmony and self-sufficiency, not from desperate need. Let it be a striving for shared joy, not an attempt to fill a void that only you can heal. Working on yourself is not a glamorous activity that requires applause and pretty filters. Sometimes it means staying alone with yourself and crying out the pain you have suppressed for so long. It's about accepting those sides of your personality that you've avoided for years. It's forgiving yourself for past mistakes. It's talking to yourself in a soft and loving manner. It's, as Louise Hay advised, looking in the mirror and sincerely saying to yourself, I love you, I accept you, I will always be there for you. This is where true transformation begins. We find it difficult to accept one simple truth. Loneliness is not the enemy. We are taught from childhood to fear it, avoid it, see it as a sign that something is wrong with us. But few people talk about the fact that loneliness can be a fertile space, a quiet soil where important discoveries sprout. This is not about isolation or emotional detachment, but about consciously choosing to spend time alone with yourself, not needing constant support and approval from others. Something amazing happens when you stop seeing relationships as an emotional lifeline to desperately cling to. Suddenly you notice details that previously escaped your attention. You discover your true desires, not those imposed by the desire to please. You recognize your own boundaries, genuine aspirations, and learn to say no without feeling agonizing guilt. Loneliness ceases to seem like a harsh sentence and turns into a unique opportunity to reconnect with yourself. It is this inner connection, nurtured in silence and strengthened by honesty, that fundamentally changes everything else. You no longer settle for meager emotional scraps. You do not accept relationships that drain you. You stop participating in exhausting affective games out of fear of being alone. Now you realize that your value does not depend on the reflection in the eyes of other people. You have learned to support yourself, to be your own faithful companion, to give yourself what you previously expected to receive from the outside. Louise Hay spoke about the power of affirmations, emphasizing that these are not just magic spells, but conscious statements that reprogram our attitude towards ourselves. Daily repetition that you are good enough, deserve respect, that your presence matters. This is not just an exercise to boost self-esteem. It is a real, quiet revolution against years of self-criticism and internal sabotage. But it's not just about beautiful words. This is continuous work, requiring close attention to your reactions, ways of interacting with others, and unconscious patterns of behavior. Are you worried that others are leaving because you are afraid of being alone? Do you think you need to be needed to feel loved? Are you sure that if you are not in a relationship, then something is wrong with you? All these beliefs, often inherited, fuel a scenario that destroys your well-being. Learning to be with yourself means rethinking the stories you've been telling yourself for years. Perhaps you have convinced yourself that you will not be happy without a relationship. Perhaps you believed that you need to share your life with someone in order for it to have meaning. But stopping and looking at the situation from a different angle, you realize that often these relationships only postponed the meeting you most avoided, a meeting with yourself. The most wonderful relationships are born when two people do not need each other, but choose to be together, when each has done the work of self-discovery, acceptance, and self-care. In such relationships, there is no place for demands, control, or fear of loss, but there is freedom to grow together, or even separate if life's path requires it. After all, true love is not possessive or dependent. It is free, mature, and conscious. To get to this, you need to go through that uncomfortable threshold that many avoid, a space where there is no one but you, with your story, your shadows, and your bright sides. This is where true alchemy takes place. There are no masks, no roles to play. Only you, with the opportunity to restore yourself from authenticity. This is not a simple and linear process. There will be days when you feel in harmony with yourself, and on others, you will again look outside for what you already know cannot be found there. And that's normal. The main thing is not to strive for perfection, but to move forward with awareness, choosing yourself again and again. Yes, it can be difficult, it can hurt, and sometimes it seems like you are stepping backwards. But as Louise Hay said simply and deeply, you have criticized yourself for years and it hasn't worked. Try now to approve of yourself and see what happens. This small but important shift in approach can radically change how you build your relationships. Because when you approve of yourself, you no longer seek approval from others. And that's when you realize that you don't need a partner to validate your existence, that being with yourself is more than enough, that your silence is not emptiness, but necessary pauses, that your company is not a burden, but a valuable gift, that the love you once hoped to receive only from another person can actually sprout from within, without conditions or expectations. Genuine self-love is not a manifestation of narcissism, arrogance, or indifference, but rather a conscious presence and acceptance of emotional responsibility for your own well-being. It is the ability to look at yourself without prejudice, supporting yourself at every stage of personal growth. It's the willingness to be there for yourself in the most difficult moments, not avoiding emotional pain, and not resorting to superficial solutions that only temporarily mask suffering. It's amazing how life transforms when you achieve harmony with yourself. People who once seemed attractive cease to match the new level of vibrations. Recurring conflicts lose their relevance. Relationships begin to form on the basis of healthier and more sincere principles. And this happens not through violence against yourself, but through a sequence of actions dictated by inner comfort and confidence. If the search for a partner is driven by a sense of need, then dependent relationships are attracted into life. If the search is dictated by fear, then conflicts are inevitable. However, when the choice of a partner is based on the desire to share your fullness and abundance, the meeting takes on a completely different character. In such relationships, there is no need to dissolve in another person in order to feel loved. There is no desire to sacrifice your world in order to maintain the connection, because the pricelessness of your own inner world and the inviolability of personal well-being are realized. Louise Hay spoke of love not as a final destination, but as a daily journey that begins with self-love. And when this path begins from within, when deep and trusting relationships are built with yourself, everything else becomes crystal clear. There is no longer any need to beg for attention, fight for recognition, or adapt to other people's expectations. A person appears as they really are, without masks or tricks, because they realize their value, even when alone. On the path to conscious emotional life, There often comes a moment when the absence of a partner ceases to be perceived as a void that must be filled at any cost, but rather as an opportunity for free and independent development. Loneliness ceases to be synonymous with inferiority and begins to be seen as a conscious choice, opening up new horizons. When a person chooses to remain alone with themselves, it is not out of disappointment in love, but out of a desire for quality that exceeds the need. It is not about giving up the desire to have company or deep connections, but about being unwilling to sacrifice one's inner balance for the sake of relationships that do not correspond to one's true essence. The essence from which the desire for exchange grows is transformed. Before, it was a burning need, a source of emotional pain, but now it is a calm, unobtrusive desire, devoid of despair, an opportunity, not an obligation. Such freedom is a non-trivial and uncomfortable phenomenon. Initially, it takes courage to destroy the social dogmas that suggest that the measure of effective success is only the presence of a partner. It takes resilience to withstand the looks of others, hinting at the abnormality of choosing solitude. But having overcome this delusion of prejudice, a person discovers something completely new. Life begins not when someone chooses you, but when you yourself decide to stop this waiting. Louise Hay spoke about the need to heal the roots, not just eliminate the symptoms. Instead of fruitless attempts to change others, she urged us to turn to ourselves with the questions: why do I attract such relationships? What aspects of my personality still need approval? Where do I sacrifice my strength for the sake of attachment? And most importantly, when was the last time I showed myself the same tenderness that I demand from others? These questions, however uncomfortable they may seem, are the starting point for a personal revolution. After all, having begun to honestly observe yourself, it is impossible to continue living in automatic mode. A person realizes that many of their effective decisions are dictated by the fear of being not good enough, unloved, doomed to eternal loneliness. But there also comes an understanding that these fears are not absolute truth, but only echoes of past experiences that no longer have power over them. Sometimes, being alone with yourself is the only way to restore the most important union, the union with yourself. If you avoid this pause, moving from one relationship to another, without giving yourself a break, unprocessed traumas, unresolved grievances, and recurring scenarios under different names accumulate. And this does not disappear without a trace, but only goes into the shadows, until one day everything that you turned away from breaks out. But when a person finds the courage to be alone with themselves, without distractions, without emotional noise, a completely different journey begins. A journey where silence is not a synonym for emptiness, but a symbol of clarity. A journey in which true needs are distinguished from illusory desires. And in this process, an internal transformation takes place. There is no longer a willingness to sacrifice one's inner world for fleeting attention. A person discovers that they are able to support themselves even in solitude, to find joy in their own company without needing external confirmation of their value. And the more comfortable they feel alone with themselves, the more selective they become in what they allow into their life. Not out of arrogance, but out of an awareness of the value of their energy and an understanding that not every interaction deserves the privilege of their presence. Louise Hay offered simple but effective affirmations to help solidify the desired inner reality. However, for these words to work, they must be supported by daily actions. It is not enough to repeat "I love myself" if you constantly betray yourself, engage in self-sabotage, and endure the unbearable out of fear of being alone. Loving your solitude is not a rejection of the love of others, but the cessation of begging for it in the form of emotional deals, where not true love is offered, but veiled dependence. When a person takes the reins of their emotions into their own hands, what seemed vital becomes a conscious choice. There is no longer a need to depend on the attention of others, to languish in anticipation of a message, a response, or a sign confirming one's own significance. Self-confidence becomes unshakable, supported by an inner feeling that does not require external proof. Of course, moments of sadness and longing for a warm embrace or an understanding look remain part of human nature. However, these feelings take on a different hue, stemming not from lack, but from abundance. A person does not betray themselves, does not remain indebted to themselves, does not hide, but appears in all their fullness. That is why relationships that arise after such internal work are fundamentally different from previous ones, because the person themselves has undergone changes. They are no longer looking for love veiled as interest, but offer love from the fullness of their heart, which inevitably affects the quality of their connections. Louise Hay spoke of love as a healing force that cannot manifest outwardly until it takes root within. One is not able to support another until they learn to support themselves. Working on oneself is not a break before true love, but true love itself, the first and most intimate, shaping all the others. Contrary to the popular belief that happiness is found only with that one special person, the truth is that everyone can become such a person for themselves. Taking care of yourself as you expect care from others, treating yourself with the same kindness that you need so much, being your own refuge, center, and whole world. This is the path to true harmony. The most important milestone on the path of spiritual development is the moment when the need for external signs of recognition, for laurels and regalia, disappears. You find inner harmony, a feeling that you are at home, and not because all the problems are behind you or some mythical ideal has been achieved, but because the exhausting struggle with yourself ceases. This is perhaps one of the most sincere forms of love, unconditional acceptance of oneself, born not out of submission, but out of a desire to live in harmony with the truth. To reach this point, it often requires rethinking everything we have been taught about the value of the human personality. From an early age, we have been instilled with the idea that our significance is determined by how much we are in demand by others. If you are chosen, then you are special. If not, then there is a flaw in you. This subtle but persistent narrative creates anxiety that poisons our emotional decisions. We turn into hunters for approval, into emotional beggars, passing off as love what is actually a fear of indifference. But as soon as you decide to discard other people's scenarios and start writing your own story, clarity reigns in your soul. There is no longer a need to convince anyone of your value, no desire to participate in games where you have to justify yourself, adapt, or please in order to be noticed. You realize that whoever does not see you as you are will not be able to love you as you need to be loved. And it doesn't embitter you, doesn't provoke anger, doesn't destroy you. You simply let it go. True understanding doesn't come immediately. It requires time and quiet. But not the kind of quiet one runs to in order to hide from the bustle, but the kind one chooses in order to hear the voice that was previously drowned out. Only by stopping and looking inside oneself without embellishment can one distinguish a sincere desire to share life with another person from a desperate desire to avoid loneliness. The difference between them is subtle, but colossal. One is born of freedom, the other of inner emptiness. Louise Hay deeply understood that the roots of many of our emotional wounds go back to childhood, when we learned that love must be earned, that acceptance requires meeting certain standards, that expressing one's own needs causes discomfort, and that showing vulnerability is unsafe. Gradually, we distanced ourselves from our true essence, creating masks designed to survive, not to connect and heal. This doesn't happen instantly. It's not enough to read a book, repeat affirmations, or listen to an inspiring speech. It's a continuous process of emotional re-education in which you learn to give yourself what you previously sought in the external world, to comfort yourself without guilt, to motivate yourself without excessive demands, to listen to yourself with patience, to trust yourself even when no one else believes in you. In this process comes an awareness sphere that fundamentally changes the perception of the world. You are not flawed. You are not half an orange destined for someone else. You are not a project that needs to be completed with the help of another person. You are a complete individual in constant development, capable of building bridges out of fullness, not out of need. What you can share with others will become an enrichment, not a crutch. This quiet but profound shift in consciousness has a huge impact. You begin to notice how your energy changes when you no longer strive to please, impress, or avoid rejection. You interact with the world from a more stable and authentic position, not afraid to lose what you don't need to hold on to. It is in this state that the most sincere connections arise, born not out of need, but out of the meeting of two free individuals. When someone chooses to be with you, and you have already learned to be happy alone, the relationship does not turn into an emotional prison. On the contrary, it becomes a space where both can grow, without limiting each other or demanding the impossible. In the modern world, more and more people are willing to show generosity and support, without taking on the burden of responsibility for someone else's emotional state. The reason lies in the awareness that each person has already gone through their own path of trials, faced personal difficulties and challenges of fate. Louise Hay, known for her self-help works, did not offer ready-made formulas for happiness, but called on each individual to take responsibility for developing their inner strength. This inner strength lies not in the desire to control others, but in the ability to undergo deep internal transformation. It's about changing entrenched beliefs, healing emotional wounds, replacing judgment and criticism with understanding and compassion. And although this transformation is not always visible externally, it is revolutionary in nature. After all, when a person decides to live consciously, they can no longer be satisfied with love based on attachment and dependence. Such a person no longer accepts relationships that involve emotional blackmail, manipulation, and codependency. They realize what the recovery process after such relationships is worth. They know the value of their energy, time, and peace of mind. And they learn to protect these values without feeling the need to justify themselves to others. This protection is not isolation from the world, but rather a filter that allows only those who are in harmony with their vibrations, who respect their personal path, and do not try to remake them according to their standards into their lives. True love cannot be forced or demanding. It is not a subject of bargaining or discussion. It is bestowed, built, and maintained on the basis of mutual respect and care. And if this is not present in a relationship, a person simply refuses to accept it. This approach to life may seem radical to those who have not yet begun their journey within themselves. However, for those who have already embarked on this path, awareness becomes a necessity dictated not by pride, but by a sense of self-worth. After all the work done on oneself for the sake of self-love, a person is no longer willing to compromise, betraying their values and beliefs. They realize that true love begins when they stop betraying themselves.